like to know your point of view.
Hi everybody, it's Evening Ransom and I'm in Cancun right now. Well, okay, so I wanted to talk about diagnosing a personality disorder. Okay, so let me say, you need to have a professional license to make an official clinical diagnosis that someone has an actual personality disorder. And even if you were a clinical psychologist, it wouldn't be ethical really for you to do that with your own relatives, your own husband, your own parents anyway. I don't think anyone that's has a channel, a YouTube channel, and I know certainly I'm not trying to say that I'm not the one that diagnosed anybody. Most people that we're talking about, most people that have these channels, don't even have anyone that's been formally diagnosed. In fact, I do. The people I'm talking about mostly have been formally diagnosed. My ex-husband especially was actually formally diagnosed by a clinical psychologist. And for many years, I was the last one that wanted to believe that. I was the last one that wanted to know. I didn't believe it. I didn't do anything with it for years. It wasn't until after we were long broke up and everything that had been predicted had proven to be true that I did believe it and use it and go and research what it all meant. But when I first got that diagnosis, I had no idea. So it wasn't something that I had contrived or made up or anything like that, and certainly didn't want it. I would love to have had that not be correct, but it was correct. But most people aren't diagnosed. But that's sort of immaterial. All of us can talk about what happened to us. We can all recognize when someone is entitled, when someone is grandiose, when someone seems to lack conscience, when someone seems not to be showing us any empathy. Those are things we don't have to have a degree to know that's happening. And all of us that have these channels have various degrees, we have various backgrounds in education. It's less important than all the years of hands-on experience I have with narcissistic relationships, which basically spans my entire lifetime because I was born into a narcissistic family. And it is really tricky because, well, if you're looking at if someone's problematic, if they seem to have problems with everyone in their life, if they have a problem with all their exes or all their family members, that's a problem. And it can be a problem, but it also can be truly what's happening to a victim because they kind of go together. If you're born to narcissistic parents, it's very likely that you're going to end up in your life with a narcissistic spouse, narcissistic friends. So it isn't unheard of. In fact, it's really rare for a person to have just one experience. Usually when that happens, there'll be an experience that's devastating, that brings someone to their knees, and then as they're kind of discovering that and learning about that, they figure out that it wasn't the first time, that there was something that led them to being in that relationship. And that's kind of what brings me to the topic for today, because I want to talk about how we know, ultimately how we know whether or not it's them or us, or if we should stay or we should go, or if it's just our dysfunction from our life, or really how we know how these things work and how in fact it does work. How does it seem to follow these same patterns? Well, the reason it's so implausible to the vast majority of people is because they're healthier. They don't know what it was like to not get your basic needs for affection and attention and love and care and basic things from your parents. So you're launched into this world as a person who's starving for love. And so when someone comes along and is finally telling you all the things that no one else ever told you, that you always were wondering, why aren't they telling this to me? Why aren't my parents telling me that I'm adorable, I'm beloved, that I'm cherished, that they think that I'm so special, and why aren't they biased on my behalf? Why aren't they protective of me? Why aren't they loyal to me? All these things. Wondering why we didn't ever get that stuff, which we should have gotten. And all of a sudden someone shows up and they're giving it to us. They're giving it to us. And they're matching, this person's really good. Their whole thing is that they're matching what it is you need, what it is you value, and they're making themselves basically measure up and be exactly what you're looking for. The thing's going is because a healthier person might be suspicious of someone who is just all of a sudden everything they are mirroring them, they agree with everything they have to say, they think that they're so special and all this stuff. But for multiple reasons. One is that we are so empty and so depleted that we need so badly what they're giving us. There's that. But there's also the fact that it is so far-fetched for us to think, because we have been living in a world where we had to tell ourselves that people loved us because society said they were supposed to love us, even when they didn't. So we're getting just crumbs of affection and and telling ourselves that it has all this meaning. So the last thing that we're going to ever think is that someone who doesn't love us is going to be telling us, trying to convince us that they do. I mean, I know in my own case, it never would have occurred to me that was happening, because why would they do that? When my whole life I'd been trying to convince myself that people that didn't tell me they loved me actually did love me. What would ever make me think that someone who didn't love me was trying to convince me that they did? It just didn't. If I was healthier, if I'd been raised with healthy boundaries and healthy parents and enough love, and if I wasn't so depleted, I wouldn't have been so needy, for one thing, and I would have been able to judge better what normal was. What was really outrageously over the top, what that was. But I absolutely couldn't, because I was so depleted. It didn't seem too good to be true. It just seemed right. It felt like finally someone is telling me all the things I've been starving for all my life. Right away, they make themselves, you and me against the world. And finally, we're not alone. Finally, we're understood. Finally, we're validated. Finally, because there is this truth that we're living, and now someone else sees it. Now someone else tells us we're okay, we see it, and you're not alone anymore. And that's wonderful, and that's exactly the way that it should be. So what's happening is actually right. It is exactly right. They're not telling you anything that's not true. It's just not true for them, So you did deserve to have someone say all those things to you. You absolutely did. It is unfortunate that you didn't get someone coming along that said it, that meant it. But the fact is that there probably was that person, but you weren't attracted to them because of your dysfunction, not understanding what was going on. You were acting on an unconscious level, and what was unfamiliar to you would be a genuinely affectionate and loving person, and kindness and all that stuff would be unfamiliar. And so that would seem, and I know it did to me, that person would seem boring or not like me. I would think that they weren't like me, when in fact they were a lot more like me. But the person who I thought was like me, and especially who needed me, was the narcissist. But I didn't know they were a narcissist. I didn't know there was something wrong with them. I didn't know, obviously, that anything they were telling me was going to be a lie. We don't know that stuff. We don't know, And it doesn't all happen all at once. It happens in steps and stages over many, many years. In fact, I would say over many, many years, even for everybody, because it does start in childhood, for most, basically everyone. I mean, like I said, there are rare cases where someone, I've only known like a couple of cases where someone wasn't narcissistically abused as a child, but what they did have happen was that there was a major crisis or major loss that happened. They were in a crisis when they met the narcissist, when they met the abuser. That's the only time I've ever seen it, so that it's not when it's not been a person who's been abused their whole childhood. Has been that. And loss of a child, loss of a spouse, a big one is loss of a spouse, and being left with a lot of responsibility, and children, and being unprepared for that, like being pretty scared. So I know someone that was left with young children, with a spouse that died right after like a parent died right before that and the parent died right after that. So it was like they were in this big crisis, and that's where they were with these three major losses and this whole change in lifestyle right before they met the narcissist. So that person was not narcissistically abused, but they were still in crisis and not, not discerning, and also not, and really needing what was coming their way, and not having the immediate support to bounce it off of. So what happens is we end up getting in these relationships where before we get a chance to really think about, who is this person to me, and what are my needs, and what do I think, we get really concerned about what they think of us, and it's kind of all about that. It's all about what they think of us. They're basically what they were doing. They're filled in all the things that you should have heard from the people who didn't say it all those years. So if we back up a little bit and we go, okay, so basically that's the scenario for how it starts. And then when they pull out, when they start doing the devaluing and the discarding, we can't understand what's happening. We can't. That is just unfathomable to us. And aside from that, if we are to then follow up with any regular mainstream love advice, like why is my relationship gone cold, everything that they're going to say to us is the wrong advice. Everything they're going to tell us to do is going to be absolutely the wrong thing to do for our situation. So we could just be stuck in this for forever, and many of us were. What should you do? What should you do if it does start going cold? You don't know, maybe you don't even understand, you don't know what's going on. If this is a narcissistic relationship, you don't know anything about, you don't know for sure about anything. And, again, the whole, you're not qualified to make a diagnosis and all this kind of stuff. Okay, well, if you've been watching these channels long enough, you've been taught the kind of the criterion, the things to look for, things to look for. Notice if you've got a problematic person, basically if you're happy or not. And this is the thing that I wanted to kind of get to on this. So you're coming here and you're learning about narcissistic abuse. That's great. Really all a person needs to know is if they're happy or not. If you're unhappy in a relationship, it's not working. It's not working. And should you stay or should you go? Well, you should go. If you're not happy most of the time, you should go, regardless of whether or not they're narcissistic or not. So that's really what it really boils down to. It's missing the point to focus on the narcissist and what, the things that they do and all that stuff, and, learning about them. But that's really missing the point. Because the only thing that we can really focus on is changing ourselves. What the real problem is that with codependence is that we don't want to be alone with ourselves. We don't want to be, because there's something at the bottom of that we're running from too, and that's of course true. Is that we are in this relationship also for some reasons, broken reasons, things that are broken in us. No arguing with that. But the thing that kind of is a little bit frustrating, I think, just a little bit, is that it's not mutually exclusive. It's like, learning about narcissistic abuse and being able to identify a narcissist